Okay, so let's resume our quest in answering the question, where was the original temple? Now in part 2, the four faces of Zion. We start out with a small thought experiment. Let's say you and I agreed to meet for a meal here. I think most of you will recognize this city. Street addresses aside, how would I refer to where we are going to meet for lunch? Would I call it New York? Or the Big Apple? Or Manhattan? New York County? Or maybe New York City? NYC? The point being, of course, all of these names can refer to the same exact place or to a wider range of places that are under the same name. Our restaurant in the heart of Manhattan is also part of New York County, but that county also covers islands off of its coast, and another place called Marble Hill. Or maybe it's in NYC, Brooklyn, or the whole state, also named New York. And yet, because New York is an iconic place and it's currently still with us, we know exactly which name we mean, where it is, and how to recognize it when we get there. But what if thousands of years have passed and New York was gone? What then? Or what if we lost part of the name and we only could recover York? York is in Canada. York is also the name of several towns in the United States, like York, Pennsylvania, or Yorktown, and so on. And by the way, if you think this can't happen to you, I'll say this. I invite you to come meet me downtown for a great steak dinner, the best wine and desserts, or anything you love the most to eat and drink, and I will pay for it. You can visit me in Atlanta anytime you like. Sound like a good offer? All you have to do is meet me on Peachtree Street and go look that up. And then all you have to do is find me. And it's the same with the names in the scripture. We read it every day and we think we know what it means. We are so sure what it has to mean, like perhaps this reference here. Zion is plowed like a field, and Jerusalem becomes heaps, and the mountain of the house is like a wooded height. So says Micah. So where is the mountain of the house, which everyone agrees refers to the temple? If you're like most people, particularly those who have not really read scripture a lot or looked at this issue a lot, the answer seems very obvious, easy. You might say, it's Zion, the mountain that is leveled like a field. Okay. And if so, you'd be dead wrong. Here's why. And Shlomo, or Solomon, began to build the house of Yahweh, that is the temple, at Jerusalem. And where does he build it? Mount Moriah, not Zion, where he appeared to David, his father. 2 Chronicles 3:1. So yes, Zion is also the name of the location of the temple. But no, the temple was not on Mount Zion. And there's another important point to make about these descriptions. When we are looking at the moment David purchases part of this land and he conquers the rest of it and all of that, it is their most primitive, restrictive, and ancient definitions of their borders that are meant. Later expansions of these land titles simply do not count. Let's break this down a little further. There is Metsudah Zion, the fortress of Zion. That's mentioned in 2 Samuel 5 verse 7, which is also known as Jebus, also known as the city of David. Coming to that one soon. But there is also Har Zion, Mount Zion, which has no fortress on it. So one Zion has a fortress, another Zion has none. But this is where Father Yah is said to dwell with his congregation, Psalm 74 verse 2. But neither the fortress of Zion nor the mountain of Zion should be confused with Greater Zion, or Zion District, covering the fortress and also the mountain and also other mountains, including Moriah and also the city of David. 2 Chronicles 3, 1 through 2, which is not to be outdone by even another description, our last one, Zion Karita, Zion City, meaning all of Jerusalem, Isaiah 33:20. But what if all we had as a reference in the text was simply Zion? Not Zion Karita, not Zion City, not Zion Mountain, not Zion Fortress. What if it just said Zion? Because in a lot of places, that's exactly what it says. So as a result, the temple can be said to be simultaneously at the fortress of Zion, at the threshing floor of Ornan of Jebus, on Mount Moriah in Zion, in Jerusalem in Zion, Mount Zion. Confused yet? If so, you are not alone. About this a little bit more, shall we? You can see what's going on here. Like I said, for a place like New York, we all know what we mean by which New York and what part of it and so on. We have our own as to which version of that name or title is the intended one. But if we lose 95% of the documents from a particular time over thousands and thousands of years, and we're just left with the scraps and we're left with traditions that are incomplete and often contradict one another, is it any wonder that coming now 3,000 years later, there's confusion? And if we add to the fact that the Jewish people suffered through 18 centuries plus of exile, removal from the land, while they are running for their lives, while they are being massacred in crusades and inquisitions and holocausts and pogroms, you name it, it happened to my people. Is it any wonder that they would also get a couple of facts maybe jumbled into that mix, just a bit? And is it any wonder that having credited the tradition, as my people do, for keeping them ethnically distinct through all that heartbreak, over all those centuries, to finally come back into the land, as the prophets demanded would happen, and as we as believers believe ushers in the Messianic age, is it any wonder that they would cling to that tradition even if the facts are pointing in another direction? These are the things we need to take into account. These are the things we need to look at, because history is not just a bunch of dry dates and place names and years. History is a living, breathing thing, and it has emotions, it has a long memory, and sometimes it's got a bit of a flawed understanding until we connect it with other history. And so that's what we're going to try to do. So let's get back to our slides. As I said, confused yet? You are not alone. Another important place name and marker is the city of David, which can be, depending upon the context, the city of David could be called Bethlehem. 1 Samuel 20 verse 6, Luke 2 verse 11, or the city of David could be Hebron. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verses 1 through 5, or maybe the city of David is Jerusalem. Zechariah 12 verses 7 through 10. Maybe it's a small part of Jerusalem, a special area in Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 32:30, or maybe even smaller, a fort in a very tiny part of Jerusalem. 1 Chronicles 11 verse 5. city of David stand up? Or which one is it? In the case of this Hebrew word Ir, city, usually, can refer to a small city, but Ir can also designate a fortified place or a citadel. Josephus shows this, even writing in Greek. He says, "Now David made buildings around the lower city, and he also joined the citadel to it, and made it one body, and called it by its own name, the city of David." Antiquities of the Jews. So, getting back to where we started, you ready to have that dinner now in the city of David, Ir David, on Peachtree Street, or somewhere in New York? Just let me know. Now let's look at this particular scripture again, but with expanded information. And Shlomo, Solomon, began to build the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where he appeared to his father David at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. These geographical details are very specific. They tell us categorically that the house of Yahweh is in Jerusalem. Okay, granted, not a big shock. Saw that coming, I'll bet. On Mount Moriah, where Father Yah appeared to David, where David bought a threshing floor. We'll be looking into that shortly. And now let's see what else we can know. And David and all of Israel went to Jerusalem, which is Jebus, or Jebus, where the Jebusites were, and the inhabitants of the land. And the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, "You do not come in here." But David captured the stronghold of Zion, the city of David. And David said, "Whoever smites the Jebusites first becomes chief and commander." So Joab, son of Zerubbabel, went up first and became chief. And David dwelt in the stronghold, which they called what? The city of David. Right? First Chronicles. Now we have even more place names to add to this list for a precise location. So we're just sort of interviewing our witnesses like a detective would, and to see what they all pinpoint. So again, starting with Jerusalem, this is what we find. The city is also known as Jebus because the Jebusites still live there. In that city, there is a Jebusite fortress that is called Zion that David captures. The Jebusite fortress of Zion is then renamed, you guessed it, the city of David. The temple will be at Zion Fortress, and so the temple was built inside the city of David. That is the point. And so the city of David, Ir David, can additionally refer to the small fort inside of it. So it's possible to go from outside David's citadel to climb up to Mount Moriah to get to Solomon in the temple, and you're still inside the city of David. So let me explain this a little bit. Basically, the traditional temple site advocates point out that it says that they took the Ark of the Covenant. This is in 1 Kings chapter 8. They took the Ark of the Covenant out of the city of David and installed it on Mount Moriah. So if you just read that, at first glance, it looks like it's saying that they took the Ark of the Covenant out of the city of David, therefore they took it to the temple, therefore the temple is outside of the city of David. However, as we're seeing, you have different places that apply under the same name, and sometimes that name is used in its smallest sense, and then a wider sense, and then a wider sense. So in this particular case, the fortress is called the city of David, And the wider city of David includes Mount Moriah. So even though they go out of the small citadel, they are still in the city of David when they bring the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. So that's why I brought that up. And as we continue here, again, that's 1 Kings 8:1, 2 Chronicles 3:1. And there's one other detail about this exact spot where the temple is, or will be. It has a water shaft right there, right in the middle of it. And David said on that day, anyone who smites the Jebusites, let him go by the water shaft. 2 Samuel 5:8. This will become a major focus, the major focus, in fact, of the third of 5 lessons, the next one coming up, which is all about the water. And here's a hint for now. The water shafts only bring water up. It is a shaft. It is not an aqueduct, which brings it down. Or across, perhaps. For now, however, it's more important to leave you with this major point. All of these references are in the ancient original borders of the city of David. But guess what everyone in this debate agrees is not inside the original borders of the city of David, meaning not just the fortress, but the original borders of the actual city, which contains the fortress. This is what everyone agrees is not in the city of David. That's the Dome of the Rock on Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that entire area that the Jewish tradition points to as being where the temple was, not a bit of it is inside the city of David, whereas the scripture is saying the temple was. The city of David, and I'm just reading from a source from the Israeli Antiquities Authority. The city of David is believed to be biblical Jerusalem and is the modern city's oldest settled neighborhood, as well as its most famous archaeological excavation relating to ancient Jerusalem history. Located south of the famous Temple Mount, excavations have revealed it to be a Bronze Age walled city. According to traditional Jerusalem history, the narratives in the Hebrew Bible, it is the place where King David established his capital and built his palace. Right? So that is, well, it's biblicalarchaeology.org, but it's talking about the official Israeli Antiquities excavation in the city of David. So how do the traditional site advocates get around the fact that the scripture is putting the temple in the city of David, and the people who are digging in the city of David say that Temple Mount's nowhere near it? Well, my answer is, unfortunately, they confuse us. As we saw, Zion was originally just the name of a tiny slice of land in Jebus/Jerusalem that became renamed the city of David. But Zion then was later expanded to include all of Jerusalem, and so not used in its primitive and most correct sense. Once Zion got expanded to include the whole city, it was easy to call the whole thing the city of David. But if you ask the professional archaeologists who are actually excavating at Ir David, they will tell you unequivocally that its original borders stand outside the entirety of the Temple Mount. This fact alone, and there will be many others to join it, makes it impossible for the Temple Mount to be the correct place. And finally, we have this testimony from the book of Maccabees, 1 Maccabees, that when enemies took the temple, they used the city of David's encircling walls against her. We read, "Then they rebuilt the city of David with a great strong wall and with strong towers, and made this their citadel. There they installed a brood of sinners, of renegades, who fortified themselves inside it, storing arms and provisions and depositing there the loot they had collected from Jerusalem. They were to prove a great trouble. it became an ambush for the sanctuary, an evil adversary for Israel at all times. They shed innocent blood all around the sanctuary and defiled the sanctuary itself. Let's look at that for a second, okay? They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary, okay? Around the temple. But where are they doing that from? The walls encircling the city of David. So therefore, the temple must be inside, right? It's as simple as that. So the scripture and the book of Maccabees are agreeing here. So let's get back to this. The citizens of Jerusalem fled because of them. She became a dwelling place of strangers, estranged from her own offspring. Her children forsook her. 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verses 33 through 38. And get a load of this one. The people in the citadel at the time were blockading Israel. There it is again. Look at it again. Round the sanctuary. And we're taking every opportunity to harm them and to support the Gentiles. 1 Maccabees 6:18. That's two references. But now we need to move on to answering another important question. What exactly is a threshing floor? I'll let an expert on the subject explain. At their most basic level, this expert says, threshing floors are locations where people perform the agricultural activities of threshing and winnowing. In ancient Israel, these floors were located on hard substrates such as bare rocks, or were created by beating down the earth until a flat floor was formed. For the convenience of transporting crops to and fro, threshing floors were often situated in close proximity to fields, on rock shelves, or on infertile soil. Conversely, threshing floors could also be located outside of the perimeter of a village or on high ground in order to take advantage of the open air and wind that are necessary for winnowing. Right? That's that source right there. This is where David built his altar and where Solomon later put the ark. So it matters. From there, the rest of the foundations and superstructure of Solomon's temple was built around it and atop Mount Moriah. And while it's true that some threshing floors in Israel were built on high rock outcroppings, generally they're called threshing floors for a reason. If you put it up too high, the wheat that you're trying to save can also blow away with the chaff, which would defeat the whole purpose of a threshing floor. In fact, one of the leading proponents of the traditional temple site at Temple Mount, Lean Rittmeyer, admits that the totality of Temple Mount is actually bedrock, which would not necessarily be ideal for a threshing floor. He says, this guy Bugatti took some illegal photographs which provide valuable evidence and wrote up his findings in a booklet called Researches sur le site du Temple de Jerusalem, Researches on the site of the Temple of Jerusalem. He observed, part of my French literary, by the way, that the bedrock adjacent the rock, inside the dome of the rock, was rather flat and only started to dip near the outer walls. The bedrock adjacent to the rock inside the dome of the rock. Okay? So the whole area is bedrock. So thank you to Mr. Rittmeyer. I appreciate the assist on this particular point. And speaking of Mr. Rittmeyer, on a different matter, I heard him say once, only after being very hard-pressed about why the Antonia fortress is so small in the Aviona model of the temple. So he was kind of backed into a corner where people were really like, hey, how can you fit, all those thousands and thousands of people in such a little itty-bitty thing? So he said that, quote, there was no proof that a full legion was needed to occupy the Antonia fortress. Really? I don't think so. With all due respect, Mr. Rittmeyer, you could not be more wrong. The Greek word Josephus uses for legion is tagma or tagmatos, and this is with respect to a full complement of 6,000 men, 6,000 soldiers. As we read here in Josephus, he took out of Antioch the entire 12th Tagma, and out of each of the rest he selected 2,000 with 6 cohorts of footmen. Cohort equals 600 men times 6, 3,600 out of a legion. This is talking about a full legion. Similarly, in the Jewish War, Book 5, verse 581, Titus destroys Jerusalem, rebukes the entire Tagma, the entire legion that is with him. The same legion, according to the Jewish War 2, verse 7-9, had been placed permanently in Jerusalem by the Roman commander Varus to reside in a barracks there as a garrison. Antiquities 17, verse 251. Similarly, in the Greek New Testament, the one time the word tagma is used is to describe a division that includes everyone from the human race who had died up until that moment. Surely applying to more than 6,000 men is no exaggeration. So then legion is a garrison, and a tagma is a full legion, and a full tagma was headquartered at the Antonia fortress, which means what passes for the Antonia fortress in the traditional view is way too small and inadequate to house those men. And there's no barracks for that legion to stay in Jerusalem except the Antonia fortress. So it's literally go long or go home. The same holds true in Aramaic. The cognate for tagma is taxa. According to the great Aramaicist and Hebrew scholar Marcus Jastrow, page 535 of his dictionary, this word means an order for battle, arrangement, heavenly array, or garrison. And for that last one, he cites the garrison at Caesarea, which held a full legion of 6,000 men. In short, Mr. Rittmeyer, there is no evidence for your supposition at all in history or in Scripture. But returning to our previous topic, this doesn't mean it is impossible for a threshing floor to have been on or near the Dome of the Rock, but its commanding height makes it unlikely that it was built on the bedrock which is at its summit, and there's no springs below it to tunnel for the water that could have supported it from below. And in a point we will pursue more in detail in part 3, the temple is built on the west side of the Gihon, near a rock outcropping called the Ophel. You'll be seeing a lot of this map. This is the city of David, and the Ophel's over there. You can see it right there. Okay? So. Oh, and there's one other little detail to talk about for this particular section. The temple must be very near the center, the exact center of Jerusalem. Here's why. In the courts of the house of Yahweh in your midst, the word is tavek in Hebrew, which means the middle or geographic center. O Yerushalayim, praise Yah. Psalm 116, verse 19. Let's look closer at this word for geographic center, tavek. And you shall measure outside the city on the east side 2,000 cubits, and on the south side 2,000 cubits, and on the west side 2,000 cubits, and on the north side 2,000 cubits. And the city is in the middle, tavek. See Numbers 35:5 and Ezekiel 48:15. In Genesis 1 verse 6, the waters are said to have been gathered, tavek, into the center place. Same with the trees in Eden, in Genesis 2:9. The Sea of Reeds, Nehemiah 9 verse 11, are split down the center. Certainly with the tree of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Anyway, in Judges 16 verse 29, Samson grasped the two tavek, the central pillars. In Jeremiah 39 verse 3, tavek describes the center pillar of the second pillar of 3. This is the rule. This is what the word means in the majority of cases. It's also true prophetically, as we see here. And I shall make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant that is with them, and I shall place them and increase them, and I shall place my set apart place in their Tavek, in their midst, forever, says Ezekiel. Thus says Yahweh, I will return to Zion, and I will dwell in the midst, Tavek, of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim shall be called the city of truth, and the mountain of Yahweh of hosts, the set apart mountain. And I shall bring them back, and they shall dwell in their midst, the Tavek of Yerushalayim. They shall be my people, and I shall be their Elohim, in truth and in righteousness. Zechariah. And the Talmud agrees. As the navel is set in the center of the human body, so is the land of Israel, the navel of the world, situated in the center of the world, and Jerusalem is in the center of the land of Israel, and the sanctuary, here it is, which is to say the temple, is in the center of Jerusalem. And the holy place is in the center of the sanctuary, and the ark is in the center of the holy place, and the foundation stone before the holy place, because from it the world was founded. Midrash Tanhuma, Kedoshim. Again, this reference is harking back to the original borders of ancient Jerusalem, the city that David knew and conquered. So where is the Dome of the Rock? In comparison to this, take a look. This is the full map we'll be using. This is the extent, what you see here, of the modern city, going around like that. And this map assumes, by the way, the rabbinic tradition, the tradition view is correct, with Mount Moriah and the temple being here. Okay? But let's see what happens. The pink area is the original borders. This is our focus, right in here. Okay? Now let's go for the close-up. Again, the original borders here. Okay? So this, obviously, is the Dome of the Rock. Right? This is the temple over the Gihon Spring. Look at these two locations. Remember, it has to be centrally located. So, this is obviously very close to the center. It's right on the line of the center part of the old city, of the city of David. This is not close to the center at all. This is well within the city of David and in the central part of Jerusalem proper. And this is way too north of the city of David and not in the center of the wider Jerusalem either. It doesn't fit. It's not in the right place. West side of the Gihon, which is what we'll look at, the scripture says that that's where the temple is. And that's the east cloister of the temple according to Josephus. And this is on the traditional site, the east side of the Gihon, the wrong side of the Gihon. The Ophel joins the east cloister. That's again according to Josephus. We'll look at that in a bit. But the Ophel in the traditional site joins the Temple Mount at the south. So next, in part 3, we're going to be getting into the key part of the water supply. That is a very important thing for pinpointing the temple, what we call follow the water. We'll pinpoint the true location of the temple based on where it had to be in relation to that water supply. The scripture leaves no doubt. It says, Yahweh loves the gates of Zion, the temple, more than all the dwellings of Yaakov or Jacob. All my fountains are in you. So says, as we see here, Psalm 87, verse 2 and verse 7. So stay tuned for that. Part 3, Follow the Water, is coming up next. I'll be right back.